Welcome to Navajo County Connection. I'm Dawnafe Whitesinger, County Supervisor for District 5, and today I have Mr. Jayne, the County Manager, with me, and I have Brad Carlyon, our County Attorney. Today we'll be talking about something very riveting and exciting, our fiscal year 2016 budget. And before we get started in the nuances, I guess, of the budget, I would like to discuss a little bit of the background and maybe the establishment of our county, how the budget was created, because that gives a better idea or description of how each of the counties across the state get their budget. So.
Well, the first 4 counties were created in Arizona in the mid-1860s by the territorial legislature. So that's before even Arizona became a state. You know, Navajo County was created in 1895. And basically counties were created to deliver state services at a local level, so that you didn't have to drive down to the territorial capital to get a marriage license or get a divorce or go to court. You could go to the county courthouse, and that's why counties were created. And so basically we're operating under, even in today's world, in 2015, we're operating really in what we kind of deem a horse and buggy era of constitution and law that was set up when, the original 4 counties were created, and then Navajo County being created in 1895, and then Arizona becoming a state in 1912. But largely, there's been more responsibilities added to counties from the state, but largely the structure of how counties were created has not changed.
So a big part of how counties were created were for the convenience of the citizens who live in counties, or to create counties for citizenship, in a sense, and creating opportunities for citizens to get the resources or to go out, maybe your marriage license you were talking about, or the things that would be more convenient for them to get those services right within their community. And as part of that, the state has established a system and how dollars are disseminated to the counties. And so when we talk about that, one of the things that I hear are partnerships. I guess we talk a little bit about partnerships. Do we feel like this is a partnership with counties and states or the state of Arizona in allowing us to provide those services in an equitable way?
I feel like a redheaded stepchild myself, and sometimes in our relationship with the state. It's supposed to be a partnership. We're supposed to, as Jimmy just said, deliver the services. But it's, I hear our state legislators complaining about the federal government and mandating onto the states things to do. Oftentimes that's what our state legislature and our governor are doing on counties. They're mandating things to us without giving us the resources to pay for them. We've seen that especially in the last 6 years since the recession hit. The state has to have a balanced budget. They could not structurally balance it, so they played a lot of accounting gimmicks, but they also basically came to the counties and said, start writing us a check, and we're going to shift some of these costs directly onto you. How many dollars in HERF money in the highway revenue funds have we lost, Jimmy?
We've lost over $6 million. Since the beginning of it, and just in HERF funds.
So when we say we've lost $6 million, what does that mean?
That means those are dollars that under the state funding formula, because Arizonans pay an 18-cent fuel tax, and that then goes into a formula to fund the state highway system and to help cities, towns, and counties fund their transportation infrastructure. So those dollars should have come to Navajo County to help maintain the 750 miles of streets and highways that Navajo County maintains for, again, safe passage for our citizens, to get to work, to clear snow, to make sure the school buses can get across. So we're now having to delay the repair and maintenance of streets and highways in Navajo County because we're having to stretch these dollars further, because the state is taking, again, these millions of dollars over the last 6 years to help offset their general fund contribution to the Department of Public Safety. Instead, they're taking local government gas tax dollars and funding DPS with it.
It's not just HERF monies, it's also other programs. Just this last fiscal year, as you're aware, starting in July 1, Navajo County will be paying all the counties will be paying 25% of the cost for the Arizona Department of Juvenile Corrections. It's a state prison for kids, but yet they're making the counties pay for a quarter of it. And then for the state sales tax, the State Department of Revenue collects that. We have a half-cent sales tax in the county. Well, now the state is going to charge the county for collecting the taxes. They're going to do that. So should the county, though we can't have the authority, should we charge the state for collecting property taxes that flow back to state agencies? But they're continuing to do that. And we, too, as a county, have to have a balanced budget. But we don't have any of the flexibility for the accounting gimmicks that they played, nor do we have the ability to change our revenue stream. As you're aware, the two primary revenue streams for county government are property tax collections and state shared sales tax. On property taxes, there's a wide spectrum between the counties. Navajo County has, I believe it's the third lowest property tax rate in the state at 83 cents. Pima and Pinal are over $4. We can't compete, but we have to provide the same services. And then what makes it worse is not only the rate that you can tax, but it's the assessed valuations of the property. Navajo County is one of the poorest counties in the state. And that's also reflected in our property values. They're some of the lowest in the state. So you take a extremely low property tax rate and low assessed valuations, we don't have the revenues of a Pinal County that has the second highest property tax rate and very high assessed valuations, not only on the residential side, but also the commercial and industrial that we don't have. And then on the state shared sale tax revenue, it's not just here's your population and everybody gets an equal share based upon your population. It's a very convoluted, tough to understand formula, but the bottom line is where your tax dollars are spent. So those counties that have a economic hub, the retail malls, the Costco's, the Sam Clubs, Coconino County, Yavapai, Maricopa, Pima, Pinal, they see our tax dollars because we go down there to buy many of our items. They get to keep it. They're not coming back here. So we're getting the short end of the stick there too. Probably the best way to give an example of that is to look at our neighbor, Coconino County, and us. In the last census, there's only about an 8% variation in our populations. We're close to the same population and actually fairly close in the same size of the counties. But if you look at our budgets, well, they have a lower property tax rate, but they're higher valuations in their commercial and industrial. They bring in a lot more property tax. Because they're a retail economic hub with their malls and their Sam's Club, they get a much larger share of the state sales tax revenue. So their budget, even though they're only 8% bigger than us population-wise, is nearly 40% bigger on their budget side. But yet we're supposed to provide the same services, but without the same revenue streams to be able to do so. It's impossible.
You bring up a lot of good points just in highlighting some of those deficiencies or the lack of maybe economic engines that exists within Navajo County. And we talk about that a lot, the concern that we have in maybe jobs or businesses not being local or being able to provide opportunities to create more jobs. And when we talk about the budget and we talk about its impact to the county, so we have an understanding that there's a limitation of dollars, that the state hasn't developed a mechanism that supports counties like ours, that we get the short end of the stick. And so when we know that, what are some of those things that we have to do as a county or that we are doing as a result of those lack of resources?
Working to become more efficient. And the county has done, I think, an admirable job of surviving, but not just surviving, being innovative and finding ways to do government differently. You know, starting back, you know, in the mid-2000s, and the county has progressed forward, and how do we do government differently? How can we be more efficient? You know, we have a workforce that is about 60 people net lower than it was back at the start of the recession. So we have 60 fewer employees, butts in seats, not just numbers on paper, but actually people in doing positions. So we've asked more for our employees. We've also asked our employees, how can we do this differently? How can we be more efficient in providing a service to the citizens that we're constitutionally and statutorily required to provide?
And we've been very good at it, but it becomes a point in time that innovation doesn't do it anymore, and you start to lose services. Of course, I'm most familiar with my office. When I came into office 6 years ago, I had 19 prosecutors. Today I have 12. I can tell you crime has not decreased over those 6 years. It's those budget dollars that have decreased.
And when you have 12, how does that impact your office?
Their caseloads are a lot higher. I lost an attorney earlier this year who just says he can't handle the workload and the stress related to that. And we're getting to that point with our prosecutors. And if this continues down that path, the innovations that we've put into place to move cases faster, to still get justice, we're going to lose that, and we're going to start losing justice. Because it's going to come to the point in time when I and my office are going to have to say, we don't have the resources, we cannot prosecute every case. So what case don't I prosecute? What victim in our community will I not be able to get justice for because I don't have the resources? And that's just my office. And that's a similar story being told in every office throughout the county. Jimmy talked about the loss of HERF monies and how in the long run it's going to cost us more because we can't do our maintenance, and someday we'll have to pay the piper. The only thing the state has helped us with is they realized that we weren't having the general fund revenues to be able to handle all the demands they were calling on us. So they've given us the last few years, and only the smaller counties, what's called flexibility language, which is allowing the county, the board, you and the other supervisors to essentially raid our other taxing districts, the library district, the health district, the flood control district, to help keep our operations afloat.
And I know that flexibility language has been a benefit to us. It has allowed us to continue some of the services. And I know that prioritization becomes a big part of this conversation when we want to make sure that the priority is providing quality services to our community and to our citizens.
But I would argue the benefit's only to keep us afloat.
Yes.
There's also a converse downside. I look just at the flood control district. We have a major flood issue in Winslow with the Winslow levee. It's given out before. Winslow's built below it. We know that we have to partner with the Corps of Engineers to repair it. We know that we're going to have X number of dollars we got to pay down the line. And being good fiscal managers, you and the other board members said, okay, how much do we need to raise from the flood control district? Let's make sure that when that time comes that we can actually get that project moving, that we have our share. Well, now because of this, we've had to go into that share, and when that day comes, we're going to have to borrow money. And that's because of what the state has done to us. And they need to start a conversation with all the counties of, let's not look at what was in the 1800s when you guys were formed and our Constitution was made in the early 1900s. Let's look at what life is like today. How do we change the structure of counties? How do we change the funding of counties? How do we change the duties and responsibilities of counties? We need to have that discussion before one of the counties falls off the fiscal cliff, and there's about 3 of us on the edge of that fiscal cliff right now.
So we know that this type of budgeting is not viable. It doesn't allow us to be able to sustain ourselves next year, the following year, 10 years, 20 years down the road. So we talk about a conversation. What would that conversation look like?
Well, can I clarify one thing, Ms. Whitesinger? First of all, if the state would have left us alone, back starting from the beginning of the recession, the county would not be having the challenges as many as we're having today. But when you come in and you take dollars and you shift costs to help a state balance their budget, basically on the backs of counties, almost it's not fair, especially since we don't have any tools to really deal with it. Yes, we've become more efficient. We're doing government differently at a local level because, basically you all are representing, and we as an organization are representing the taxpayers of Navajo County. And I think we all take that very seriously. But looking forward, there's not really a sustainable path forward. When you look at the increased cost of state retirement, health insurance, the cost of doing business, even at with today's economy, I mean, we're expecting a 1% increase in revenue the next fiscal year over the current year. So basically next year over this year, 1%. That doesn't come anywhere near covering the cost of doing business. So the state has got to work with us as partners to look forward to a sustainable, to look for a sustainable path moving forward.
You know, the 1% increase dwarfs and I'm not sure what the percentage increase demand the state is moving monies back. And that doesn't even take into consideration the rising in healthcare costs, the rising of the retirement contributions. So once again, for this budget cycle, you're essentially cutting dollars that we can't continue to cut if we're continuing to provide those statutory services.
And I think, you know, one of the things is we've talked about the county, or we've talked about the state impact, and we haven't talked about the federal level and their impact. And so when we add all of these dollars up, you know, what are the resources that are being taken away? And most often we see that in the form of quality personnel. We see that in the form of, just as you were saying, that there are a lack of resources, and having 12 prosecutors is rather as many as you need. I know in the Sheriff's Department that we lose deputies almost daily because there's an enticement of leaving because we don't have the dollars to support deputies as we would like to. What are those other elements that we may be missing?
We're a training ground, is what we've become. You know, one, it's hard to attract people to a rural area unless they grew up typically in a rural area. I know with me and attorneys, so many come from an urban, suburban. They come up here, and 10 o'clock at night, you have a Circle K and Denny's open. That's culture shock to some of them. For many of us, that's what we like about a small town, that and going to the grocery store and taking an hour to get a gallon of milk because you got to say hi to everybody. But we are training them because I can't come close to what Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal pay. And for some people, that's where they're going to go for the money. The same with our Sheriff's Department. They'll go down to the valley where salaries are 25 to 50% more. And then that throws an additional burden on the county because we're retraining. Because typically we don't bring in somebody with experience, we bring in somebody that's new, which means we have to go through and train them on how to do the job and how to do it the Navajo County way, which is an additional expenditure that most people don't see. We're very fortunate that we have some wonderful employees that give their all not only in the job but back in the community. Almost any event that you'll see in any community, there's going to be a county employee participating in that in one way or another, just because that's the nature of the people that go into governmental service, is a giving type of career.
I think one of the important things out of this conversation is certainly we want community members to know how the budget impacts our decision making, the resources that are available, but we also want them to know maybe it is how they can support local county or how they can reach out to their lawmakers. What does that look like for you?
I think one of the first steps is, and this show does a great job of it, is just explaining what counties do. Too many of the people that I meet and talk really don't understand what the county does. Sometimes they actually think a lot of the things we do, a city or town does, or they think the state does. And this show and you and the other supervisors are doing a wonderful job explaining many of the services and functions that a county does. And then I think hoping this show will help the citizens understand why maybe they're got more potholes in their county road than they're used to, why it may take a couple more minutes for a deputy to show up on a 911 call than it did before, because we don't have as many. And they're being called in many different ways. Why it may take an extra day or two to have your deed recorded and be able to get your mortgage set up for the recorder's office, because we don't have the same number of personnel. And hopefully as they understand the services we provide and how Navajo County impacts every citizen in this county on a daily basis, when they see their state legislature, or when the next budget comes along and they're hearing that the state wants millions more from the counties again, maybe they will contact their legislator and say enough is enough. You either have to stop taking from the counties, or you need to figure out how to make sure that Navajo County is sustainable, because we're not sustainable and we're going to fall off that financial cliff, and we can't do bankruptcy because our debtors are employees. We're just going to tell our employees we're not going to pay them. they'll just disappear. What's going to disappear is the services. It's going to be the snowplow operator that's out there on the roads the next snowstorm. It's going to be the deputy being able to respond to that call in minutes instead of hours. And those are quality of life and maybe even life-sustaining issues that will occur that we may have problems with because they have basically cut us off at the knees when it comes to funding.
I think you hit it right on. One of the things that I've likened our county to is a family who's living from paycheck to paycheck. And I often think of our county as family and the people who work for Navajo County as family members. And when we're living to paycheck, what does that mean? We're trying to make sound fiscal responsible decisions so every penny can be stretched as far as we need it to, that everybody's needs are met, and ensuring that we're not putting ourselves in jeopardy of not being able to provide services or provide help to a family member. So, but when we talk about, well, is it sustainable? It's not sustainable. How will it impact our county? And it's certainly relevant in helping our community members understand that.
And the legislature has a clue as to what's going on, because this last budget, they actually wrote a check to Graham County for $500,000 because they know it wasn't sustainable for them. You know, we're next.
Yeah.
And are they going to start writing checks to us? And if so, how does that help them balance their budget? They need to sit down, tackle that tough problem on counties, how they're funded and what services they provide. Until they do that, we're going to be teetering on that fiscal cliff.
And you know, I hate to get into the muck of it in a sense of asking, what would that look like? Because I know that's quite a hefty conversation, and looking at, you know, what is that formula going to have to look like in order for each of the counties to have equitable dollars or support for citizens who live within their community. I think that would be a difficult thing.
Well, there's going to be a lot of people at the table screaming and yelling, wanting things their way. But why do we have an 83-cent property tax rate and PEMA over $4? Why aren't we uniform across the state? You know, why? And the sales tax or the retail hubs, they're the ones that get the money. So you know, it perpetuates their economic growth while we get none. It has to look what is equitable across the board for all 15 counties. And they're tough calls because there's going to be people out there who just say, just cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes and more. And that's fine. But you still have to fund enough for the services that we're required to perform. Otherwise, start changing the statutes and don't make us do all those services anymore.
Limitations on services. I got the signal on wrapping up here in a minute. We have 4 minutes. Are there any final comments on this particular subject?
You know, again, when you look back to, you know, when counties were first created in Arizona in the 1860s and Navajo County created in 1895, you've basically piecemealed some funding options together over a period of time to where you are today. And the county attorney mentioned the flexibility language that the legislature has given us the last several years. Year by year, there's no assurity that we're going to have it in the future, but they've also acknowledged in giving us, at least from a manager's perspective, I believe they've acknowledged that county finances have got to change, and the times have changed, and they wouldn't have allowed us to go in and use secondary district money for general fund operations. So they've realized something has to change, and now we hope that over the course of the next 6 months, going into the January of 16 legislative session, that they will come to the table with counties and find some constructive solutions to try to do government differently.
Yeah, and as you started the show, county governments were formed essentially in territorial days in the 1800s and then formalized in our Constitution in 1912. Things have changed. We no longer ride a horse for a day from Show Low to Holbrook to go to the county seat. We have internet. And the infrastructure needs of the counties have changed. The infrastructure needs for the state have changed. But yet, our laws haven't changed to let the counties help us develop those infrastructures needed, including railway. That railway from Holbrook down to Snowflake that fed Catalyst. They don't give us the tools to develop and maintain that infrastructure needed so that we can have economic growth ourselves. And part of that is giving us those new statutory tools, and the other part is giving us the funding sources so we can make that happen, so that we can grow. We have lots to offer, but our hands are tied on so many ways that it's making it impossible to do what needs to be done.
Well, I appreciate you gentlemen joining me today. I think it's an important conversation, certainly something that brings light to our citizens in being able to understand, one, how we provide services, and maybe two, the limitations on services that they're maybe used to. We have tried to prioritize and to the best of our capacity in utilizing the dollars that we have without impacting the services or quality. But is that sustainable? No, it's not sustainable for years to come, or even next year or the following year. So this conversation is quite important in giving some light to that, and I appreciate that. And this is a new format, I'd like to say, suggested by Brad. We're having a conversation. So I have no notes, a little scary, but I think we did okay.
You did well.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dawnafe.
Well, thank you for joining me for this month's Navajo County Connection. I hope you take some time and the opportunity to enjoy the summer. It's the month of July, so go out and recreate, go fishing, go camping, go do something.